Hi, this is Simon Canish and welcome to another marvelous video. Today we'll be talking about the backstory of the Omega Sentinels from the world of Transformers. When we think of Transformers, we think of characters like Optimus Prime, Bumblebee, or Megatron, thanks to Michael Bay. But today, we decided to take a route that is not often taken by the fans of the iconic series. The Omega Sentinels are a form of Transformers from the Generation 1 continuity family that is frequently Autobot aligned. They were one of Cybertron's primary peacekeepers and caused the Decepticons a lot of problems at the start of the Third Cybertronian War. So without further ado, let's find out more about these giant titans, like Transformers, in more detail. Before we go into our explanation, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin.
Guardians, vaporize, please.
Who are the Omega Sentinels? Appearing initially in Generation 1 animated series, the Omega Sentinels were a range of mass destruction weapons developed in large quantities. They came into being as a result of Project Omega. The Omega Sentinels, also called the Guardian Robots, were previously responsible for maintaining order on Cybertron. They were strong giants that protected cities and put down rebellions. At the start of the Third Cybertronian War, the Guardians caused the Decepticons many problems, but by the contemporary period, they were no longer as common. Omega Supreme is the only surviving Guardian with a name, a distinctive color scheme, and a distinct personality. However, it is uncertain how unique these characteristics genuinely are. Omega Supreme is also the most prominent surviving Guardian. Sadly for the Decepticons, Omega Supreme isn't the only enormous Autobot of his type. We'll come back to that in a second. These enormous robots, which the evil Quintessence first created as the Dark Guardians, were at least as tall as the latter combiners. They were used to uphold their rule and end at any chance of a successful uprising. The early Cybertron robots could rise against their quintessence adversaries because of a technology created by the Honorable A3, the Coda Remote. The significance of this failure led the Quintessence to try to stop A3 from using the device in the future, but they were foiled by the efforts of the future Autobots. After seizing control of the planet, the Transformers transformed the Dark Guardians into Guardian robots, enormous robotic defenders that maintained order and shielded Cybertron's citizens from numerous dangers. Despite their vast size and strength, the Decepticons finally overcame the Guardians, and they were able to wipe out a large number of the considerable peacekeepers. At least one Guardian was endowed with awareness and the capacity to change into Omega Supreme, who guarded Crystal City until Megatron's troops decimated that city. In the early stages of Megatron's campaign, just before his first conflict with Optimus Prime, the only other Guardian robot believed to have persisted even partially intact, Omega Supreme, was made inactive. Omega Sentinels in Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy. Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy is a Netflix original anime series that premiered in 2020. The plot comprised 3 chapters or seasons, each with 6 episodes. Chapter 1 was called Siege, where the story shows the catastrophic civil war between the Autobots and the Decepticons, and it's nearing its end. The battle ravaging their home planets of Cybertron has reached a critical juncture. Optimus Prime and Megatron, 2 leaders, each desire to preserve their world and unite their people, but only on their terms. To resolve the battle, Megatron is compelled to contemplate using the Allspark, Cybertron's source of all life and power, to reformat the Autobots and therefore unify Cybertron. Optimus Prime sought the Guardians for help, but the Giants maintained their neutral attitude despite his pleadings. On the other hand, Omega Supreme would come to the Autobot aid by fending off the Decepticons as the Ark followed the Allspark via a space bridge. The Guardians were mentioned again in the story's second chapter, called Earthrise. During an assault on the Kaon Arena, Elita 1, believing that she was being monitored, lied about the Guardians being on alert for an attack, enticing out the camouflaged Shockwave.
You must be
Short information about each Omega Sentinel. These massive space entities are consistently linked to a much smaller bot that holds their activation codes. Owing to the Omega Sentinels' nature as weapons of mass devastation, the Autobots need trustworthy persons, often high-ranking military officers, to keep the activation codes concealed and safe. Omega Supreme. Omega Supreme, the first in line of Omega Sentinel weaponry, was sadly aware of the severe combat toll his companions must have taken for him to be activated in the first place. Omega Supreme will not hesitate to unleash his immense weaponry on their behalf, even if it means risking his own life and safety. Omega Supreme was placed in hibernation after being severely injured in a successful fight against the Decepticons. His alternative mode spaceship was used as a restoration vessel under the leadership of Optimus Prime. He was bonded to Ratchet. Alpha Supreme. Alpha Supreme, codenamed Axelon, was Project Omega's second weapon. As seen in Transformers Animated just after the Silvat Wars and the arrest of General Sideways, who allegedly damaged the engines, Alpha Supreme fell into a black hole. Alpha Supreme and all personnel were lost, including Primal Major, who was bonded to the vessel and may be locked in a temporal loop. Beta Supreme. The third Omega Sentinel weapon created under the Project Omega, Beta Supreme, codenamed Battlestar, was linked to Big Bang Prime. Beta Supreme existed throughout Floron 3's ambush and the Battle of Iacon. He was severely damaged by blackout during the latter, but he managed to inflict significant harm on the Decepticon in return. Gamma Supreme. Gamma Supreme, codenamed Gung Ho, was the fourth Omega Sentinel weapon that was linked to Longrak Major. The Decepticons called him a ghost ship due to his remarkable ability to avoid destruction, despite multiple straight clashes with the Decepticon war fleet. Throughout the Great War, Gamma Supreme experienced numerous near calls. He was nearly destroyed during the Machine Wars on Vehicon, the attack on the Decepticons at Floron 3, and the battle for Omnitron. The Decepticons thought that he was destroyed on all three occasions, adding to the Sentinels' notoriety. Gamma's luck ran out during the Battle of Iacon, when he was finally eliminated by Megatron. Delta Supreme. Delta Supreme, also known as Dark Star, was the fifth Omega Sentinel weapon and was attached to Silverbolt Major. Delta Supreme was destroyed by the Revenge, the Decepticon starship over Velocitron, destroying his motors and transformation cog beyond repair. During the Asphalt Wars of Velocitron, the stationary Sentinel was reconstructed as an artillery platform. However, it was soon destroyed in a bombing attack commanded by Blackout. Epsilon Supreme. Epsilon Supreme was the sixth Omega Sentinel weapon created as part of the Project Omega, codenamed Eclipse, and was connected to the Scattershot Major. Epsilon Supreme was one of the Omega Sentinels that attacked the Decepticon fleet at Floron 3 after being duped into going there by bogus Allspark, citing reports. When the Decepticon vessel Victory attempted to flee, Epsilon positioned itself directly in its path and rammed it. He was killed in the hit, but he slowed the Victory sufficiently for the other Sentinels to terminate it. Zeta Supreme. The Zeta Supreme, codenamed Xantium, was Project Omega's seventh Omega Sentinel weapon. He was bound to Impactor Major and sent to the Wrecker's base. After serving the Wreckers for thousands of cosmic cycles, Zeta Supreme was decimated by the Sentinel-hunting Decepticon called Heavy Brigade, leaving Blackout as the sole survivor on both sides. Zeta was first Omega Sentinel to die at the hands of Blackout, as numerous others would follow. Eta Supreme. The eighth Omega Sentinel weapon created was Eta Supreme, codenamed Hyperion, and was connected to Hotspot Major. Eta Supreme sustained significant damage during the Decepticon ambush on Floron 3. He had a refit after being repaired, which made him more cautious, and he subsequently had a considerable impact in the battle for Omnitron. The battle for Iacon, where Eta lost his life to Blackout, was his last conflict. The rest of the crew hauled Hotspot Major away from Eta Supreme before the Sentinel's reactor became critical despite his insistence on staying until the very end. Theta Supreme. Theta Supreme was the ninth Omega Sentinel weapon created, also known by the codename Tsunami, and was connected to Railspike Major. Theta Supreme, who had spent over 1 million years serving the Autobot Navy, took part in the Dust Wars and was wounded above Beta 4 by a plasma mine. Starscream subsequently destroyed him while he was being hauled away for repairs. Iota Supreme. The 10th Omega Sentinel weapon was named Iota Supreme, codenamed Iron Hope, and was connected to Wedge Major. Iota Supreme didn't last long. He led the attack at the battle for Omnitron on his first very mission, suffering significant damage in the process. After that, Lugnut wrecked him as he was being fixed. Kappa Supreme. Kappa Supreme, codenamed Chromia X, was the 12th of the project's Omega's Omega Sentinel weaponry and the only known female Sentinel. She had a link with Override Prime. During the Great War, Kappa Supreme spent most of her time on watch duty and saw less combat than the Omega Sentinels on the front lines. Blitzwing finally destroyed her as he was accompanying a supply convoy. Her death, however, was not in vain, since she gave the convoy ample time to escape unscathed. Sigma Supreme. Sigma Supreme was the final Omega Sentinel weapon created for Project Omega. Perceptor placed him in emergency status after he was injured during the Battle of Iacon. He is now the flagship of the Autobot fleet, known as Steel Haven, and has been upgraded with a Vanguard booster module. Ultra Magnus, who acts as his captain, is his bond. A fun fact, the Steel Haven's layout is identical to the Autobot shuttles shown in Transformers, the movie. Omega Sentinels storyline in comic series. In the 2002 comic series, the Omega Sentinels were called Guardian robots, who were meant to guard critical areas and resources on Cybertron. They were one of the biggest and strongest mechanoids ever made. The Sentinels battled to protect whatever they were designed to defend, mostly without sparks. Omega Supreme was unique among them in that he possessed his own spark. He was also the final Sentinel created since Kaon's concerns about the Sentinels' morality halted their creation. These gigantic mechanoids were spotted defending several strategical essential areas in Iacon. During this Decepticon invasion on Iacon, they were among the first and final lines of defense between the Decagon and the Decepticons. Despite their might, the Omega Sentinels gradually succumbed to the Decepticon assault, with deactivated Sentinels dotting the Iacon countryside. During the combat, Shockwave was able to destroy 2 Omega Sentinels with a single shot. During the conflict, Omega Supreme and other Sentinels were dispatched into space to search for the lost Ark and protect against cosmic dangers. Those on Cybertron would be decommissioned when the Autobots' enormous fuel consumption could no longer be met. Shockwave deployed the Sentinels to stop the Dinobots' assault on Iacon millions of years later, pushing aside the illusions of peace and cooperation and declaring martial law. Following that, the Autobot insurgency began in full force, with Optimus Prime leading the different splinter groups into war. The Autobots battled as one, overcoming the Omega Sentinels and Shockwave-faithed Decepticons. Optimus was able to avoid one of the Guardian robots owing to Hot Rod and Ironhide's cover fire. As the Guardian caught Ironhide, its claw was destroyed, only for the elderly Autobot to freeze its motor with a shot of liquid nitrogen. The Guardian robots were defeated after a long struggle, with Defensor bringing down their last member. In the name of peace, their defeat permitted the Autobots to retake Cybertron. Their story continued in the 2005 IDW continuity, showing the Omega Sentinels were lauded as the protesters of the Crystal City, where the 13 Primes met regularly during the rule of the 13 Primes 10 million years ago. Prompted by Onyx Prime, Primer aspired to spread Cybertronian civilization into the stars, commissioning an interstellar fleet to capture and settle the nearby planet of Antea, which included a contingent of Omega Sentinels led by Omega Supreme. When the two species first met, they went into battle, and the Omega Sentinels led the deadly Cybertronian conquest. The conflict ended when an Antean scientist created and deployed a weapon that annihilated all life on the planet, killing numerous Omega Sentinels in the process. As a result of the carnage and Cybertron's involvement in it, it ensured that the other races would learn to dread the Transformers' strength. The Crystal City had gone underground following the conclusion of the First Cybertronian Civil War. By the time the lost metropolis was recovered by Nova Prime, only its commander Omega Supreme survived. The Omega Destructors were gigantic enforcer units utilized by the government during the Senate's tenure. However, they were rarely used. They had a similar design to Omega Supreme, but it's uncertain if they had any further link to the legendary Omega Sentinels. In the early days of the conflict, the merciless Zeta Prime used the Omega Destructors to crush any resilience to the Autobot authority. The Behemoths required vast quantities of energy to function, which was difficult since Energon was in low supply, but Zeta remedied the problem by equipping them with Vampark ribbon weapons intended to drain Energon directly from the bodies of Cybertronians. The upgraded Destructors were first used against the rebel-infested town of Nion. Orion Pax and his Autobot squad used all of their firepower to distract one of the Omega Destructors to buy enough time for the insurgents to flee the city. city. Giving up on his efforts at evacuation, the rebel Hot Rod then exploded a vast number of bombs placed across Nion, destroying both the city and the Destructors. As the united armies of Orion Pax and Megatron attacked Zeta's Prime Citadel, the surviving Omega Destructors were keeping watch. The attackers defeated the Destructors thanks to Cup's knowledge that the Giants could be brought down by focused firing at a seam junction in their undercarriages. The last one posed a challenge until it was destroyed by a full power blast from Shockwave's gun mode. As Arcee, Bumblebee and Optimus Prime entered Unicron, they found the damaged body of an Omega Sentinel among the mishmash of everything the Chaos Bringer had swallowed, causing Bumblebee to question whether there was some truth to the old rumors of Cybertron's ties to Unicron. Soon later, Bumblebee sought out the injured Omega Supreme in search of knowledge about Unicron's past. Though Supreme could not respond to the Minibot's questions, doing so cost him his life, thereby terminating the Omega Sentinels forever. Marvelous verdict. That brings us to the end of the video. In several renditions of the source material, the Sentinels were the protectors of Cybertron, formidable giants that defend citadels and crush uprisings, molding civilization for generations. And while they're like titans, they weren't as generous, which is alarming since they realized the catastrophe overtaking the Earth and how harmless robots were struggling. This element of unpredictability is what makes these characters so attractive, along with their immense strength and powers. Though they haven't made their big screen debut yet, seeing these giants bully the Autobots and Decepticons will surely be a lot of fun. So what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this video, then click the like button and share it with all your friends. See ya!